Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099, and I am here for an installment of I Stand Alone. If you've never seen one of these videos before, essentially I take a comic book, I read it, and then I determine, does this comic book stand on its own, or do you need all of the backstory that happened before this comic book? Because in theory, every comic book is someone's first comic, and so I essentially put this to the test. Does every first comic stand on its own? Of course, I'm not reading every comic, I'm reading select comics. And today I am reading The Human Torch, issue 4. This is from the early 2000s. There were advertisements in here for Mark Millar's Trouble. If you remember that series, that was very early 2000s. It was a whole nother thing, probably worth an entire video. There were advertisements for the Runaways series by Brian K. Vaughan. So this is a kind of an older comic. I bought this comic book new from a Walden Books, I think. And I didn't buy any of the other issues from this series, so this literally will probably be one of the best ones to do an I Stand Alone on, because I don't know a whole lot about what was going on with the Human Torch around this time, other than a few Fantastic Four stories I've read from the early to mid 2000s. So essentially what's going on here is that the Human Torch has kind of sort of joined up with a fire department. Turns out two people in the fire department have been attacked by spontaneous combustion. One guy died, another guy, Johnny, saved. And he is kind of hanging out with the fire department to figure out what the heck is going on. One guy on the fire department, he went to high school with Johnny, and his face is all messed up because apparently when Johnny shortly after got his powers, he accidentally burned this dude's face, and this dude never told anybody. A little bit of a weird retcon. I would have thought that if Johnny knew that this is something that had happened, that he wouldn't have been the immature, happy-go-lucky guy that he was for the last 50 years. So it's one of those retcons that doesn't really work, in my opinion. So anyway, Johnny kind of starts hanging out with these guys. He goes with them into a burning building, and they are attacked by a woman in entirely covered up in leather, I think. She's dressed kind of like Firefly from the Batman comics, and she calls herself Firefox. She reveals that she invented a machine that is supposed to control fire that would be very useful for firemen, but what it actually does is it displaces fire. So if a building is on fire and she like aims her hand at it, it would just like take the fire and put it like up in the air, I guess. And so she has been using this to attack the firemen because they did not purchase her machine, and now she's kind of blackmailing them with this device, I guess you could say. First thing I've got to say, not a whole lot actually happens here. Johnny decides that he's going to hang out with the fire department, and then they go into this burning building, and Firefox shows up. Back in the day, and I mean like way before I started reading comics, almost before I was even born, back in the day, that would have been like a third of an issue. This is part 4 of a storyline that I'm assuming is at least a 5-part storyline, because it just ends kind of abruptly. And I really just, this is one of those things, kind of the reason I do the I Stand Alone videos is because sometimes a story will stand by itself, but it itself is not a complete story. I will go ahead and say I think this issue does stand well on its own. You get one of those things at the very beginning of the comic where it kind of tells you what all you've missed. Just in theory, somebody hasn't read the previous 3 issues. I had not read the previous 3 issues, so it tells you a little bit about what's going on with some of these characters. And I will say some of the information I provided you at the beginning of this video came from this little foreword at the beginning that kind of explains and summarizes the previous 3 issues. Without that, I would have been a little clueless about a couple of the exchanges that went on in this comic book. This comic does stand alone. My problem with it is that it's just too much of a, okay, and this is part 4 of a 6-part story. I really don't think that this needed to be at least 5 parts long, maybe longer. Like I say, I haven't read the other parts of the story, but this definitely could have been told in less than an issue, and I'm assuming that the other issues could have been done in less time also. So instead of being a 5-part story, it could have been a 3 or 4-part story. And I'm never happy when that happens, because it means that you could have paid $5 for a complete story, but instead you're paying $9 for a complete story. This only gets worse as time moves forward and you have comic book storylines that can span 20 or 30 issues across multiple titles, and comic books become more and more expensive. When I first started reading comics, which was right around the time when this thing came out, comic books were $2.50 in the United States. Now, you're more likely to find a comic book that's roughly $4 in the United States, and you're not going to find anything that's $2.50. So while I do think that this comic does stand alone, I do think it's a little bit cheap in that the story has been stretched so thin and it really didn't need to be. Now granted, I haven't read the rest of the story. Maybe those other 4 issues are really tightly packed with lots of stuff happening, and this one was kind of spread thin. Maybe. But I'm just assuming that if this one is so thin on plot and stuff going on, that all the others are as well. I don't know if you can get this in trade paperback form. I did not look it up before starting this video. But I will say some of these creators you've probably heard of. Karl Kesel, he's done some work that I liked in the past. And Skottie Young, he's got a very stylized style, kind of anime, manga inspired. And I like his work most of the time. It's really good here. He did some new X-Men stuff in the 2008, around that time. That stuff was not as good as what's going on here. I like this work a lot better than that. So that's about all I have for this episode of I Stand Alone. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you will come back tomorrow for another video. And if you did like this video, I hope you will comment, share, subscribe, and like. Do all those things that you love doing on YouTube videos. Until then, I will see you guys tomorrow with something else. Have a good day.